I'm Eileen Robinson. I am editorial director of Charlesbridge Moves. This new imprint under Charlesbridge Publishing excites middle grade and chapter book readers with adventure, science fiction, fantasy, historical and realistic fiction, mystery, and humor to spark curiosity for every kind of child, every kind of reader out there, to get them to read more. Whether through traditional prose, verse, or graphic novel elements, our stories grow and sustain an appetite for reading over the long term, especially with boys and reluctant readers. Here today, we've got our fabulous authors who are launching this wonderful, wonderful imprint. Let me introduce you guys, and then I would love it if you guys would just say a little bit about yourselves to our audience. We have Jeff Schill, author of The Kid.
Thank you, Eileen. I appreciate being here. Yes, I'm very excited. It's my debut novel, The Kid. And it's mainly about a character named Henry who lives in the Old West. He loses his parents and he makes a decision that being the oldest of the family, it's up to him to keep the family farm going and to raise his brothers. Running the farm is not a problem. That's what they've been doing their whole life. But he's very concerned about keeping mischief away from the area. So he decides to start writing these stories about a quick draw kid who's arresting criminals and outsmarting criminals in the area to keep people away. But the stories catch steam. They get published in Gunslinger magazine, and they soon become the hottest story in the West. And there is a real criminal named Snake Eye Sam who gets a hold of the stories. And he decides to break out of prison to head west to take on the kid and make a name for himself. And at the same time, Hebert, an editor of the Gunslinger magazine, also decides to head west to see his favorite client. And all three of them merge in the dusty streets of Destiny, Colorado for a showdown at noon, where Henry has to try to figure out how to outsmart a real criminal.
What made you write a Western?
Oh, I don't know. I think it's a combination of things, right? I think I grew up watching Westerns. My dad made me watch every John Wayne and Clint Eastwood movie whenever it was on. And I think I've always just kind of been interested in that genre. I was a history teacher, but I think ultimately it was just a challenge. Like this idea popped into my head of a quick draw kid in the West. And how might that look? And how might he outsmart criminals? And it just kind of spurred from there and kept going.
Well, you know, kids love cowboys, always have. And I think they're making a comeback in our industry. So your book is perfect timing. And this book actually just came out in May. So next, Bill Thomas. Bill has written a book called Hum. Bill, can you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about Hum?
Okay. I am Bill Thomas, and Hum is my first novel. I started writing for kids quite a while ago, and I had about over 30 books, nonfiction. I was working in a local high school with a young man who needed a lot of help. He was in 10th grade and taking high school biology. All of the kids in the class every Friday had to stand up in front of the group and give a short presentation, like 1 minute long, on something to do with biology. And this kid was just fascinated with llamas. And every week he came in with something new about llamas, so a lot of stuff I never knew, including the fact that llamas talk to each other. They have a language, they hum, much like dolphins make those clicky noises and elephants have these subsonic rumblings. Llamas hum to each other. And it was about the same time that my grandson, who was then a little over 2, was learning to talk. And so it occurred to me, if a child was raised with llamas and heard them speaking to each other all the time, could not the child learn to speak the llama language? And those two things were kind of the generation for the story.
You mentioned to me at one point that there is a place that children can go to actually hear llama sounds. Can you tell us a bit about that?
if you go on YouTube and just, do a search on llama humming, you'll find lots of examples of it. I mean, they make lots of other noises too, but their humming is really kind of a language.
I call you Bill, but it's William David Thomas, Hum by William David Thomas, is coming out this year as well. Next up is Tina Athaide, Wings to Soar. And Tina, much like everyone else, you know how I feel about this book. Could you please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about Wings to Soar?
I will. Thank you for having me today. My name is Tina Athaide. I am the author of Wings to Soar. It's a precious book to my heart and to my soul. The story behind that is not well known, I think, throughout. So that was one of the reasons I wanted to tell it. But it's about a young girl who finds herself and her family in a resettlement camp on the outskirts of London because President Idi Amin had kicked out Asian Indians from Uganda and given them 90 days to get out of the country. They just had to leave. And so her family is there without the father, who is still there, but they're waiting for him to come. So the father is supposed to come and they're supposed to leave. But when he doesn't show up, their time on the camp is cut short. They have to leave, and she finds herself thrown out into London and having to settle into that country. The story takes place in the mid to early 1970s, where there was a very large anti-immigration movement in London. And so she faces great adversity towards acceptance of people of color. She loses a little bit of her own identity, being stamped and labeled the refugee versus her having a name. And so she seeks inspiration from the music of Diana Ross. She also befriends an American pilot who is on the other side of the base, where the Americans were at that time historically, and the resettlement people were on the other. And so it's an opportunity for her to resolve who she is, her identity, with everything going on, but also getting a better understanding of what it is to be judged for your color. But the story is written in such a way that her voice is very loud on the pages. Viva in Portuguese, because my heritage is Goan. Viva in Portuguese is living full of life. And this is my character. And her little world embodies that. And she holds on to that piece. And so it's her holding on to that throughout and finding hope and inspiration in different places.
Thank you, Tina. Why did you decide to write this as a novel in verse?
Honestly, so that's the second half of this. The first half of this book is a gift to Tina, little Tina, in the healing process of what that adversity was that I faced. Adult me wrote this as a gift to my students. And so I specifically work with learning disabled students, specifically those that struggle to read. And as they get older, what breaks my heart is that they feel that their books don't look like their peers' books. Or they open a page and there's so many words on there. And so I wanted a book twofold, one that would look like, if they're carrying it, it looks just like their friends. But beyond that, when they open the page, they wouldn't get overwhelmed. It was my gift to my students so that they could talk about historical fiction, just like everybody else. It's at their grade level, it's at their age level. It looks like everybody else's book. One of their peers could pick it up and no one would know.
I love that, Tina. Thank you so much. And your book is coming out at the same time as William's book.
Really? Yay.
Both in July. In July of this year. So congratulations on that. Corinne, thank you for joining us. Corinne is the author of Saving Kenny. Corinne, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and Saving Kenny?
My name is Corinne Gaile, and I'm the author of Saving Kenny. I am an artist, a visual artist. That's been my career, and I've taught sculpture at the university. I always wrote for fun, but about 20 years ago, I started writing seriously. Saving Kenny is a story that's set in Boston in 1968, which for those of you who were there, like me, it was a very exciting time. It was a very tumultuous time. We had the Vietnam War going. There was all kinds of liberation, women's lib, gay lib, Black power, and Kenny and his family, with all of these factors affecting their lives. Kenny was a quiet boy in a household with a bunch of really bold, big personalities. Big brother was a Black Panther, and his mother was an overworked, abusive person. Kenny went to an opera. His sister dragged him to the opera, and he thought he was going to be really bored, but instead he had an epiphany, and he decided that he wanted to be a costume designer. And in order to pursue his goal of studying costume designing, that struggle gave him the courage to dream a better life for himself.
Thank you, Corinne. This is a very emotional book, a very touching book, but also a very hopeful book. And Kenny is only 11 years old. So what do you hope readers will take from his story?
The main thing is that I want children to understand that they can come up with their own solutions, that they can figure things out.
I am positive that these books are going to speak. There is a book here for every child, particularly reluctant readers, which is why we're here. And before I talk about that, I just want to acknowledge two other authors who will be with us at another time, who are on our backlist and, are very much responsible for why Charlesbridge Moves is what it is right now. Christine Taylor Butler, The Lost Tribes. This is her third book in the series, and I call it the baby Black Panther. If Black Panther had children, this is it. Follow the River by Paul Gracie. This is an Alaskan adventure. So if your readers like books like Hatchet by Gary Paulson, they'll love something like this. So that said, these books are mainly for reluctant readers. What is a reluctant reader? They can read. They don't have problems with decoding or fluency or comprehension. They're not struggling, but they just can't find the right book. So I want to ask, and any one of you can start, please feel free. Can you tell us a little bit about your experiences working with reluctant readers?
Well, I can start. I was a reluctant reader. Yes, all the way through school. I had lots of books. I would start reading a book, but I would never finish it. I did not have any difficulty with reading. I got A's in English. So in school, when we had to write our book reports, I had a system. I would read the first chapter, the last chapter, and a chapter in the middle. And then I would write my book report. I would summarize the story, and then I would say, and my most favorite chapter was, and that would be like chapter in the middle. And I always got A's on my book reports. And it wasn't until the 8th grade when I had a teacher named Mrs. Scholes, I'll never forget. And she is the one who got me to read a book all the way through.
Well, we're certainly glad that reading stayed with you. Otherwise, we might not have this book. So that is wonderful. And I'm curious as to why you think you would never finish a book.
I think part of it was I never related to the characters in the story. Like, I never had a book about a Black girl, and I couldn't really articulate that, but it just wasn't interesting, you know. But I was eager. I would start the next one, but I would put it down.
Jeff, I'm going to put you on the spot because I heard that you used to be a reluctant reader too.
I was, yes. I was also a reluctant reader. And actually, there was a period of time when I was a kid where I read all the time. I loved Ramona, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, Tales of the Fourth Grade Nothing. I read them nonstop and I couldn't get enough reading. And I remember going to the librarian and saying, I want more books like these. And she said, well, we don't have any. Here's some wilderness books. Here's The Outsiders. And it was all these stories that I just could not relate to. They didn't have the stories that I was looking for. So distractions happened. So then if I can't find the books, I went outside and ran around with my friends and played sports and did other things because the books didn't interest me. And I also then later on became a teacher, and I saw that with my students. The same thing was happening to them, especially with the boys in middle school, that there were just too many distractions around their cell phones, sports, television, too many things happening. And if they didn't have books that they enjoyed, they would leave those books very quickly to go do other things. And I think that's in my mind where I started to think about writing books for kids to keep them reading, keep them active. And I love how the variety of all of our stories, because I think that's what we need. Kids need to find that story that catches them, and anything we can do to keep them reading and away from the distractions.
Bill and Tina, you guys both teach as well. What are you seeing in terms of the reluctant reader?
You know, it is increasing. Even statistically, they're showing we are seeing an increase in the number of reluctant readers. And that is affecting children's vocabulary, all of those components that makes them successful in school later. I think if we go back to both what Corinne and Jeff said, the key with our reluctant reader, and for all of us, I think we would admit it too as adult readers, is we gravitate toward a book that excites us and that has an interest for us. Personally, as an educator, my biggest challenge was always finding a book. I believed there was a book that could hold my students' interest from beginning to end, Corinne, not first chapter, last chapter, middle chapter, hopefully in betweens too. And so I would go to the library, I would poll them, get their interests, and then go pull a slew of books off the shelves. And I would do a book club with them, so that we could talk about what was happening in the story, not the structure, not plot, not those teachery things, but like fun things, like, oh my gosh, what would it be like to talk to a llama? Can you imagine, do you think? Or to listen to that hum for the first time. And so if we're engaging, they see how you can have that. So I come home with a stack like this.
Thank you, Tina. Bill?
I was never a reluctant reader. If anything, I was a voracious reader. My family was not well educated. I was only the second person in my entire extended family who went to college. But in my house where I grew up, people were always reading. And at a very early age, I was read to often. I think that is part of what we're not seeing with reluctant readers today is adult modeling in their lives, not in school, but in their home life. Adults reading themselves, not just reading to them, which is extremely important, but adults reading themselves and the kids seeing the adults reading and enjoying it. As authors, there's not a whole lot, at least authors writing for children, there's not a whole lot we can do about that. But in terms of a couple of the things Tina pointed out, especially in a school setting, getting kids to talk about books themselves. When I was in fourth grade, this was, back when books were still written on parchment. the Hardy Boys came out. I mean, they had been written back in, I don't know, the first books came out in 1929 or something. But they made a comeback, and it was like Harry Potter. Especially all the boys in fourth grade were grabbing these books, and we had a Hardy Boys book club. Okay, you got that one for your birthday, so I'm next on the line. You pass it to me, and I'll pass it to this one. But what I try to do is have a lot of white space on the page when I write. And what could be one long paragraph, I try to break up into 2 or 3 paragraphs. And I write short chapters, 3-4 pages at the most, because a lot of the reluctant readers just aren't going to put up with it for that long. But if you can get them through a chapter or 2, then they will likely continue.
Do you know what's funny about that, Bill? My kids will look at the book and say, oh, good, these are short chapters. And you think that they'll stop. And the funny thing is they'll read it. And if you have a hook at the end, they'll say, oh, the next chapter is only 3 or 4 pages. I'll just read it really fast. And then there's another hook. And then they've read, and by the time they finish, they've read like 4 or 5 chapters unbeknownst to them completely. And I love that. That's the one. And then for me, I view white space as giving my readers an opportunity to breathe. So many people don't really think about that. When you're sitting with a child and watching them read, and you see the physicality of that and their body, you see their brain and body hit that pause when it goes to the white space, or if there's an illustration, it's amazing. They're powerful tools.
I agree with both of you about white space. And I think you guys open the door to the next question about what features in your book do you think make it perfect for a reluctant reader?
Let me just kick off on the different typefaces. I haven't been able to see Jeff's book yet, but we got, I don't know if you can see this in the camera, but there are several different typefaces just on these couple pages. Every time the llama talks, it's in a different typeface than most of the rest of the book. And I think that offers a visual break for readers. It's like, okay, not all of this is just this, serif typeface going on down the page. So I think that helps.
I think we've already kind of touched on this, but kids need to see themselves in the book and in the characters. And unbeknownst to you, Eileen, you asked me a very hard question to kick this off. You said, why did you write a Western? And in my brain, I don't think I wrote a Western. I wrote a story about a kid who's struggling with his family and his responsibility and how he takes care of his brothers and growing up. And it just happens to take place in the Old West.
In the Old West.
And I'm hoping it's just a unique way of a kid seeing themselves in a story. And I think if they see themselves, that will keep them interested and keep them reading.
I think you're absolutely right. It sort of, I think, sends a message that no matter where you live or what time frame you live in, we all have certain commonalities. And speaking of features, we know that all of our Charlesbridge Moves books have a poster on the inside jacket that you can hang up on your wall. And then the case cover, which is the cover once you take off the poster, that cloth cover has a really nice new something you won't see inside the book, illustration on that cover that you can carry around and intrigue, other readers with that. We also have a QR code, which is another feature of Charlesbridge Moves books, where you can go directly to that page of the book that you're reading and find all kinds of really cool, fun stuff. And this is not school related at all. It's just fun. I'm going to read you 5 quotes, and I want you to pick one that you like and tell us how that relates to your book and your philosophy, as a whole. The first is from George R.R. Martin. He says, "A reader lives 1,000 lives before he dies. The man who never reads lives only one." The second quote is by Mallory Blackman. Reading is an exercise in empathy, an exercise in walking in someone else's shoes for a while. The third quote is by Jim Rohn. Reading is essential for those who seek to rise above the ordinary. The fourth quote is by Jean Rice. Reading makes immigrants of us all. It takes us away from home, but more important, it finds homes for us everywhere. And the last quote is from Judy Blume. Let children read whatever they want and then talk about it with them. If parents and kids can talk together, we won't have as much censorship because we won't have as much fear.
I could go on all of those, but I'll take one where it says reading is an exercise in empathy. Books do that, fiction especially. It lets you get into the heart and the soul and the mind of another human being whose experiences may be completely different from your own, or even more important, they may mirror the experiences that you and the feelings that you have had. To be a complete person, you really need to read fiction and get understanding of empathy, especially with younger readers, from that reading experience.
I like the reading makes immigrants of us all. I feel like reading is the gateway to everything. It's the gateway to the whole wide world. You can educate yourself on any subject with a library card. Everything you need to know, it's in a book somewhere. I like to write historical fiction, and the reason I do is because I think that children need to understand that history isn't a list of dates. It's stuff that happened to somebody who lived through it. And just like, people lived through different periods of time of history, they're also living through history. I also feel that as a Black person, as an African American, we weren't allowed to read. It was against the law for us to know how to read. And why is that? Because if you know how to read, you've got the key to the kingdom. So it's really important to get our kids to read.
Thank you, Corinne. Thank you so much. Jeff, did you have a favorite?
I think I'm going to choose the George R.R. Martin, and not just because I'm a big Game of Thrones fan. I think this quote just really resonates, that a reader lives 1,000 lives before he dies, and the man who never reads lives only one. That just resonates to me, because reading transports you to another world. You can do anything you want through reading. I can ride a dragon, I can go up in a spaceship, I could be a baseball player, I could be a race car driver. It doesn't matter. I can live a whole different world through a book and live that character's story. And I think that's the magic of books and the magic of reading.
I actually just finished reading a book that's going to be released soon about this author's life, Judy Blume. Let children read whatever they want and talk about it with them. For me, that's so important, because a book that's shared creates a safe space to have critical conversations that you may not necessarily have. And having a safe space to have these critical conversations with children about children who are experiencing it is a powerful opportunity to build, like Bill said, empathy, like Corinne said, that gateway, what Jeff was talking about. Those are all big things. And the more that we can talk to children about what we are reading and what's happening in the books, those critical conversations, you do start to erase the fear a little bit, as Judy Blume said. It's important.
I have a question for you guys, something I want you to imagine. Imagine this. A young person says to you one or more of the following things. I don't like that book. Reading is boring. I read in school. What's so great about reading anyway? It's all fake, a fantasy. It's not real. What kind of response could you have for them that might be fun? what would you say to them? Or what would you show them? You know, how might you get them going on the path of reading?
I'll jump in because I think I've heard every single one of those statements, and I think I hear them all the time. School just ended for me. So going back to school, because I teach, going back to school in the fall, I'm sure somebody will say that. I mean, how cool will it be for me to be able to say, you know, to the one that says reading isn't for me, there's nothing out there, this is just completely boring, to say, oh my gosh, have I got one of the books for you? I have Saving Kenny, I have The Hum, I have The Kid, I have, you know, mine, Wings to Soar. I said, I can almost guarantee you there's just some smidgen in one of these 4 that will excite you. And they're not like a regular book. There's something different in each of them than the books that sometimes you see on the shelves. I said, so let's look. And when it's something concrete right in front of them, and I've planted that little challenge and that seed of, there's something in these 4 that you don't know about. Don't you want to see?
One of the things we want to do is validate the kids' feelings. You know, I was one of those kids who would say, I don't like this book. And the teacher would say, oh, that's ridiculous. It's a good one. Read it anyways. And I think, you know, we need to validate that response. And if they say, I don't like that book, well, let's find one you do like. Let's go. There's a whole bunch on the shelf. Let's go find one that you do like. Where are all the pictures? Well, let's go find a comic book or a graphic novel or something that does interest you. I think the good thing is we're living in a world right now where there are so many stories and so many books that kids can pick up. It's up to us as the educators or as adults to help them find those and navigate where to look for all of those books.
I absolutely love that. And I think that is the key. There is one out there for every one of us. It may not look like a typical book. It may be on a tablet, like Bill was saying. It may be in the form of a graphic novel, but it's out there. And if we don't help them find it, they're not going to find it on their own.
If a kid came to me and said, I don't like this book, or I didn't like this book, first thing I'd say is, cool, tell me why. If you were an editor, what would you do to make that book better? That's one thing. The other is, and I have tried this in schools with limited success because kids get too nervous to do it, but I asked them to like take a chapter and read it as a play. One of you is the narrator, one of you is the voice of this character, one of you is the voice of the other character. And what this does is, I think, translate the printed page almost like a play. You can see it in front of you, which is what most of the reluctant readers are more used to, is, you know, what's on a screen. This is what it is. Plus, and I know I do this myself when I'm writing, read it out loud. It's different than when you read it silently. It not only draws them into the subject, but it draws them into the process.
I think also letting them know that it's okay if they don't like something. You know, once you've gone down that path, right? What I love about your response, Bill, is that they can't just say they don't like it. Yeah. They have to say why.
I would say try to find a book that's similar to a movie or a TV show that you like, that's in that genre. Mm-hmm. You might enjoy a story like that. You might even want to read a book that has been made into a movie and see which one you like better in the end. I also said to read a biography of someone that you admire. I remember when I worked at the library, we had this one boy, and he was developmentally disabled. He would sit and read biographies. That was his favorite thing. He was a good reader, and he really loved reading biographies about stars and sports figures and things like that. So find what kids are interested in.
And do you guys have any parting words for our audience?
Find the book you love and read it, and then find some more.
Read them, talk about them, find some more.
I can't remember what I read last week, but I remember every chapter of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. I think the books we read as kids are the most influential, powerful books that we will ever read in our lives. So keep those kids reading.
I think it's pretty much been said. Find a book and read it. Do whatever you can to get our children reading.
Thank you so much, guys, for being a part of Charlesbridge Moves and for making children's lives better everywhere. So thank you, and success to all of you.